What's going on, guys? It's Brandon here back again today for another season as we cross another one off the list. 2014-15, or as I saw it, the last year where I was happy in hockey. That's a lie. 2023 when Vegas won the Cup, I was also pretty happy. But last season I was happy with what the Hawks did. We'll start with the Central Division. Remember, now we have 7-team divisions, 4 divisions of 7, or 4 divisions of 7, and 2 of those have an extra team with 8. St. Louis leads the way at 51-24-7 with 109 points, followed by Nashville, who's back in the playoffs after 2 years out, 47-25-10, 104 points. Chicago, 48-28-6, 102 points. Definitely a year where they flew under the radar. No one really picked them out of the mix to do much in the playoffs. People probably thought their best years were probably behind them. Minnesota, 46-28-8, 100 points. Winnipeg makes their first ever playoff appearance, 43-26-13, 99 points. Dallas, 41-31-10, 92 points, just outside the playoffs. By just, I mean not 7 points. They fall out of the playoffs after being in. Colorado goes 39-31-12 with 90 points. And they fall out of the playoffs as well after finishing first in the Central Division in the previous year. They finished last in this one. In the Pacific, Anaheim, 51-24-7, 109 points, ties with St. Louis for the lead in the conference. Exact same record. Vancouver jumps back into the playoffs surprisingly with Willie Desjardins behind the bench, 48-29-5, 101 points. Calgary jumps back into the playoffs for the first time in 6 years, 45-30-7, 97 points. LA, with an injury-riddled season to say the least, falls out of the playoffs as the Stanley Cup champions are out. 40-27-15, 95 points. Missed the playoffs by about 4 points. San Jose also falls out at 40-33-9, 89 points. The only time really in this era that they missed the playoffs. Edmonton, 24-44-14, 62 points, and it's bad. It is really bad in Edmonton. You've had 3 first overall picks, other high picks, and you still can't get it together. And of course, this draft is the Connor McDavid draft. And Edmonton had the third highest odds to get him. Arizona or Buffalo could have definitely used it, but although I don't think Buffalo deserved it, Arizona would probably have deserved it more, who went 24-50-8, 56 points. Edmonton wasn't trying to tank at this point. That's the thing, and they still got McDavid. Arizona, who's, by the way, they're now the Arizona Coyotes and not the Phoenix Coyotes. Arizona, it was not purposely, but it was clear they were trying to go for first overall. And Buffalo, they were just purposely selling off everything. I still can't believe to this day they didn't get anything for like tanking or anything like that. Montreal goes 50-22-10 to lead the Atlantic Division at 110 points. This is Carey Price's magical season. Tampa, 50-24-8, 108 points. They are a consistent playoff team from here on out. Detroit still in the playoffs, 43-25-14, 100 points. For Detroit, it's very interesting to me because now they're back at 100 points. And it makes you think, okay, so they're not that far off, but in reality they really are. Ottawa goes back into the playoffs at 43-26-13, 99 points. Remember, it's every other year with Ottawa. Boston, after winning the President's Trophy, falls out of the playoffs. 41-27-14, 96 points. Florida, 38-29-15, getting better at 91 points. Toronto, 30-44-8, 68 points. This is where the start of the Shanna plan begins. Buffalo, 23-51-8, 54 points. Buffalo was purposely trading good players to tank more. Anytime they had a goaltender playing well, they traded him off. Anytime they had any sort of success, those players that were causing the success were removed immediately. And we'll see in the trades that some of the stuff they did was pretty questionable in terms of were they tanking or are they not. I mean, most people, I think at the time, would say that yes, they were. The Rangers were the President's Trophy winners that year, just like this year. 53-22-7, 113 points. Washington, after a year out, jumps right back into the playoffs at 45-26-11, 101 points. The Islanders, 47-28-7, are back in the playoffs after a year out, 101 points. Pittsburgh in the wild card 2 spot, surprisingly, at 43-27-12, 96 points. Columbus, after a year in, falls right back out. 42-35-5 with 89 points. Philadelphia, you know how it is every other year. The odd years they don't make it. 33, 31, and 18, 84 points. New Jersey, 32, 36, and 14, 78 points. Carolina, 30, 41, and 11, 71 points. In the playoffs, you had C1 versus Wildcard 1, St. Louis versus Minnesota. Minnesota upset St. Louis in 6, which was a shocker at the time. People thought St. Louis was finally getting ready to start winning some series again and get back into contention. Nope. C2 versus C3, Nashville versus Chicago. Although Nashville goes up 3-0 in Game 1, Hawks storm back to win that game and the series as they win that one in 6. And so the two underdogs win those series. P1 Anaheim plays Wildcard 2 Winnipeg, which / Atlanta franchise, who at this point still has not won a playoff game, as they are swept by the Anaheim Ducks. 2 playoff series, 2 different cities, 2 different sweeps. P2 versus P3, Vancouver versus Calgary. Calgary, as the underdog, takes that series in 6. So 3 out of 4 underdogs win in the West. In the East, number A1 Montreal versus Wildcard 1 Ottawa. Montreal wins that one in 6. The Hamburglar, that's where his story happens, and he did well. Andrew Hammond did very well in his run. Of course, he ran into Hart Trophy Carey Price, which he forced that series to 6 games, which I gotta say, what an achievement that is. A2 versus A3, somehow Tampa Bay nearly loses to Detroit, but they end up winning in 7. M1 versus Wildcard 2. The Rangers over Pittsburgh once again. In 2014 they beat Pittsburgh. In 2015 they also beat Pittsburgh in 5 games this time. And then M2 Washington versus M3 Islanders. Washington nearly loses that series in 7, and Tavares' thing for not being able to win starts to come up, which would be over quickly the next year. But for the Islanders, they haven't won a series since 1993 at this point. And for Florida, it's been since 1996. Of course, both of those will be a series in Toronto since 2004. But so all 3 of those will be over by the time this series is over. Second round, C3 Chicago sweeps Wildcard 1 Minnesota for the 3rd straight year. They take them out in 4 games. So you beat them in 5 games in 2013, and 6 games in 2014, 4 games in 2015. Yeah, Chicago owned Minnesota, to say the least. P1 Anaheim versus P3 Calgary. I really wanted Calgary to win that series. This is where Johnny Gaudreau finally is starting to come up, and he's starting to play a big role with the team. And I really liked Jiri Hudler. So, and of course Jonas Hiller was one of my favorite goaltenders growing up. I don't know why. I just remember liking him a lot. Of course, Hiller leaves Anaheim after they have Anderson and Gibson. So he goes over to Calgary, and Calgary kind of gets stopped by Anaheim in 5 games. They did have one game where I think it was Game 3. There was maybe some hope, and then Anaheim really squashed it out. This was the year I thought Chicago's probably not going to win it this year. Second round from the East, A1 Montreal loses to A2 Tampa Bay in 6. And this is the first time these two teams met that it didn't end in a sweep. So Tampa advances to the conference final. M1 Rangers versus M2 Washington. And very iconically in Game 7, Derek Stepan scores the goal over Holtby. The Rangers win in 7, and Ovechkin's reputation is shattered, to say the least. This was the year that I think really did it. They thought, okay, it's official, he can't win. And the next 2 years only made it worse. In the conference final, C3 Chicago, by some measure of miracle, beats P1 Anaheim. That was a series that I thought they were getting outplayed most of, and they still came back and found ways to win. Game 2 was one of those games where that was the longest game in Blackhawks franchise history. Andrew Shaw with the header, and then Kruger getting the winner in triple overtime. Game 5, they really frustrated me because I thought it was over. Jonathan Toews scores 2 goals in the last minute of the game to tie the game, and then Anaheim comes right down the ice in overtime and scores. And then Hawks rattle off Game 6 and 7. And I remember Game 7 so vividly in my head as I was jumping for joy when the Hawks went up 4-0. And then I think they won that game 5 or 6-3. In the East, A2 Tampa versus M1 Rangers. The President's Trophy winners lose in 7 to those Tampa Bay Lightning. as we go to the Stanley Cup Final, where it's the third team in the Central, the Chicago Blackhawks, versus the second best team, the Tampa Bay Lightning. In Game 1, Chicago wins 2-1, and Kaloran gets the goal early in the first. Teravainen and Vermette get the winners in the last, I think it was in the last 7 or 8 minutes of the third period in Game 1. Game 2, Tampa wins 4-3 in Tampa, and then they go to Chicago and win 3-2, and I'm thinking, okay, this might not go our way. And I'm going to be honest, I was kind of bored out of my mind this entire series. There was not one game in the series that I found that was really fun. It was really shut down, it felt like. It was really controlled. It wasn't very open, and it wasn't very fun. Game 4, Hawks win that one 2-1, and they go back to Tampa, where a miscue by Ben Bishop and Victor Hedman cost Tampa the series, to say the least. Bishop gets hurt multiple times in the series. We also see the coming out party for Andrei Vasilevsky, who played some games in this final, and he played phenomenally. 2-1 Chicago victory in Game 5. In Game 6, it's Keith with the winner, Kane with the second goal. 2-0 victory for Chicago as the Hawks win their third Stanley Cup in 6 years, making them what most people would consider a modern-day dynasty. Tyler Johnson leads the playoffs in scoring. Blackhawk Tyler Johnson, that is. 26 games, 13 goals, 10 assists, 23 points. Kane also in 23 games has 11 goals, 12 assists, 23 points. Tyler Johnson gets a huge contract after his playoff performance here that he's never able to live up to, that just ended this season. He was on an 8-year deal. The Hawks took on that deal for Brent Seabrook's contract, and he still played well under it, but he was being paid too much for what he was no longer bringing to the team. Ends up winning his Stanley Cups with Tampa, though, and he's still a free agent, I believe, as I'm recording this. So I'm not sure why he hasn't signed. He nearly had a 20-goal season after only playing 60 games or something like that on a team that really had no business getting anything. Bishop went 13-11 with 3 shutouts, a 2.18 goals against average, and a .921 save percentage. Vasilevsky gets the other win, and I'm not sure how many losses they had. So Tampa lost 3 games in round 1, 2 games in round 2, so that's 5, 3 games in round 3, so that's 8, and 2 games in round, so that's 10. So how did Bishop go 13-11 if he only played 10 games that he lost? Oh no, they lost 12, that's why. So Vasilevsky ends up going 1-1. Crawford goes 13-6, 2 shutouts, a 2.31 goals against, and a .924 save percentage. No issue with Crawford this entire playoff run. He was overall pretty solid. In terms of award winners, Art Ross goes to Jamie Benn, who, in one of the craziest Art Ross chases in history for one of the lowest amount of points. Going into the last day of the season, it was Benn, it was Tavares, and it was Crosby. Crosby gets knocked out early. Benn and Tavares in separate games are going back and forth, point for point. Benn ends up edging out Tavares. 35 goals, 52 assists, 87 points for the Hart winner. No one had 90 points that year. No one had 88. 87 points. Meanwhile, McDavid put up 153 how many years ago? He with the Dallas Stars, and they're still there today. Devin Dubnyk wins the Masterton with the Minnesota Wild. Aaron Ekblad wins the Calder in Florida, who still, I would argue, has not lived up to that first overall pick hype. It's not that I don't like Ekblad, it's just that I think he didn't really do what a first overall pick does. Conn Smythe goes to Duncan Keith, meaning each of the Hawks' big 3 ends up winning a Conn Smythe. The Selke goes to Patrice Bergeron of the Boston Bruins, of course. The Hart goes to Carey Price of Montreal. The Jack Adams goes to Bob Hartley of the Calgary Flames. Norris goes to Erik Karlsson, who gets his second with the Ottawa Senators. The Clancy goes to Henrik Zetterberg of the Detroit Red Wings. The Lady Byng goes to Yuri Hudler of the Calgary Flames. The Ted Lindsay goes to Carey Price of the Montreal Canadiens. The Messier goes to Jonathan Toews for his leadership with the Chicago Blackhawks. The Rocket with 53 goals is, of course, Alexander Ovechkin. The Vezina goes to Carey Price with the Montreal Canadiens. 44, 16, and 6 was his record. 9 shutouts, a .933 save percentage, and a 1.96 goals against average. World beater. This is where his legend comes from. This is where he solidifies his Hall of Fame because of this season. It's kind of like Jose Theodore, where he had that amazing season, except Theodore he had a few good seasons, but Price was consistently good throughout his career. The Jennings goes to Carey Price and Corey Crawford. So Corey Crawford, has 2 Jennings trophies in his career. Really random, to say the least. First team All-Stars on the left wing, Alex Ovechkin. Down the middle, John Tavares. On the right wing, Jacob Voracek. Voracek making a first-team All-Star team. I remembered how good he was, but I didn't think he was that good. Carlson and Subban on the blue line, Price in net. So 2 Canadians there, a Senator, a Flyer, a Islander, and a Capital. So all Eastern Conference guys in the first team. Second team is Jamie Benn, Sidney Crosby, Vladimir Tarasenko, Drew Doughty, Shea Weber, Devin Dubnyk. Weber's on all these second teams, but I'm really not sure why. I'm yes, he was a very good player, but first ballot Hall of Famer and all, and guys like McGill, and he still didn't get in. It's mind-boggling. The rookie team: Mark Stone, Johnny Gaudreau, Philip Forsberg up front, John Klingberg, Aaron Ekblad, and on D, and Jake Allen in net. So Allen making his way up with the St. Louis Blues that year. In terms of free agency signings, not a lot of big signings this year. A lot of guys near the end of their careers finishing up their careers. Manny Malhotra goes to Montreal because I can't believe he's still playing. Christian Ehrhoff goes to Pittsburgh. Benoit Pouliot cashes out at Edmonton after a good playoff run with the Rangers. Paul Stastny goes to St. Louis. Mike Camilleri goes to New Jersey. Clayton Stoner to Anaheim. UC Jokinen to Florida. Mason Raymond to Calgary, where he'd have concussion issues. Dan Boyle to the Rangers. Dave Bolin to Florida. So the Hawks got a second and 2 forwards for a guy that played 1 year with the Maple Leafs and dipped and barely played. Koska goes to the Rangers. Orpik goes to Washington. Ryan Miller to Vancouver, which we all know that contract all too well. Ales Hemsky to Dallas. Al Montoya to Florida. Thomas Greiss to Pittsburgh. Blake Como to Pittsburgh. Sean Thornton to Florida. Jordan Tutu to New Jersey. Brian Giunta ends his career in Buffalo. Matthew Perreault to Winnipeg. Carlo Koliakovo to Philadelphia. Scott Gomez to New Jersey. Martin Brodeur to St. Louis, which was bizarre at the time. Jonas Hiller to Calgary. Thomas Vanek to Minnesota, who's going to go play with his old buddy Jason Pominville. Daniel Carcillo goes back to Chicago. Devin Setaguchi to Calgary, which I didn't even remember, but I wanted to put it on the board. Stefan Robidas to Toronto, where we know the name Robidas Island. Matt Molson to Buffalo. Martin Havlat to New Jersey. Jerome McGinley to Colorado, which did not make much sense to me at the time, but I guess because they finished first and then they ended up finishing last. Strawman to Tampa Bay. Engelland to Calgary. Clemenson to New Jersey. Mazzaros to Buffalo. Hunwick to the Rangers. Dubnyk goes to Arizona, yet he ends up in Minnesota. Brad Richards signs his 1-year deal in Chicago, and that was a very excited signing for me. I loved Brad Richards, so when he came to Chicago for the 1 year, I was so happy. He replaced Michael Handzus as that second-line center. Matt Niskanen to Washington as Handzus retired. Brian Boyle to Tampa Bay. Evgeny Nabokov to Tampa Bay. That would be his last season in the NHL. Patrick Eaves to Dallas. Olli Jokinen to Nashville. John Scott to San Jose. Mikhail Grabowski to the Islanders. Nikolai Kulemin, who I just wanted an excuse to write his name on the board. I have a million of his hockey cards and haven't heard his name in a very long time. He also goes to the Islanders. I believe that's Jeff Schultz to the Flyers, although it might be Nick Schultz. Mike Ribeiro to Nashville. Derek Roy to Nashville. Stepniak to the Rangers, David Booth to Toronto, Daniel Winnick to Toronto, Michael Del Zotto to the Philadelphia Flyers, Brizgalov to Anaheim, where he first began his career. Verbata goes to Vancouver, where he has an excellent first year. Tim Gleason goes back to Carolina, David Legwan goes to Ottawa, which I didn't even remember. Anton Volchenkov to Nashville, Danny Heatley to Anaheim, and Brendan Morrow to the Tampa Bay Lightning. We got a lot of trades here to discuss. This was a big year for trades, so I don't even have them all on the board. I got the rest on my phone right here. June 27th, 2014, James Neal goes to Nashville for Hornqvist and Spalling going to Pittsburgh. Spalling would end up in San Jose the next year, I believe. Hornqvist becomes a big piece of the Pittsburgh team. James Neal, always one of my favorite players. I have one of his jerseys with Pittsburgh, so I got it for $10. June 28th, 2014, Carl Gunnarsson in a fourth to St. Louis for Roman Polak to Toronto. I mentioned that because Gunnarsson scores a big goal in St. Louis' 2019 playoff run. This trade's bizarre. June 28th, 2014, Brandon Bolig goes to Calgary for a third-round pick going to Chicago. A third-round pick for Brandon Bolig. Thank you, Calgary, but why? June 30th, 2014, Danny Briere goes to Colorado for P.A. Paratote and a fifth to Montreal. Briere was very slowing down at this point. July 1st, 2014, we got a big deal here. Jason Spezza, and I honestly don't know which Carlson this is. If it's a Linus Carlson, I don't know which Carlson this is. It's not a big one. They go to Dallas for Alex Chason, Nick Paul, Gupatil, and a second going to Ottawa. October 4th, 2014, Johnny Boychuk goes to the Islanders for 2 seconds and a third going to Boston. October 4th, 2014 as well, the Hawks make a huge mistake. That's painful to this day. Nick Leddy and Kent Simpson go to the Islanders for Ville Polka, TJ Brennan, and Anders Nielsen. We lost Leddy for nothing. After he had a fantastic 2014 playoff performance, and we lost him for nothing. This trade alone inspires me to do a series of how I would have had the Hawks team throughout the years. Like what moves I would have made to not get rid of some guys or keep some guys or bring other guys in. I mean, I would do it simply with Hawks draft picks, guys I would have moved out at the time. But I probably wouldn't do it on camera first. I'd probably do some test runs of it, like just making it the rosters by myself. But like this stuff, that's a painful deal right there. January 2nd, 2015, David Perron gets traded to Pittsburgh for Rod Klinkhammer and a first going to Edmonton. Perron was good in Edmonton. He was decent in Pittsburgh. Of course, he only spent 1 year there. January 14th, 2015, Dubnyk goes to Minnesota for a third to Arizona after they quickly realize they're not in the playoffs. January 29th, 2015, Clendenny goes to Vancouver for Gustav Forsling going to Chicago. This is a steal for Chicago, except it's not, because Chicago manages to screw this one up as well. February 11th, 2015, we got Buffalo decides to sell off the entire world. Evander Kane, Zach Bogosian, and someone named Cass Dorf are traded to Buffalo, so they get younger with Kane and Bogosian, for Tyler Myers, who won the Calder with them for some reason, Drew Stafford, understandable, Yoel Armia, who's a young forward, Brendan Lemieux, and a conditional first going to Winnipeg. Evander Kane, understandable. Bogosian at the time, understandable. He's only 6-7 years into his career. I don't know who Kasdorf is. But giving up your Calder winner Tyler Myers. Yes, he never lived up to his Calder year, but he's still a young defenseman. Drew Stafford was older. I can understand moving him. Yoel Armia is young at this point. Brendan Lemieux, I don't even know what to say about at that point. And the conditional first. You're a Buffalo team that's trying to get better, and you want draft picks to do that, and you trade out a conditional first. I'm not sure if the conditions were ever met, but who knows. And then on February 11th as well, Buffalo's not done, because Enroth goes to Dallas for Anders Lindback and a third going to Buffalo. Lindback was the starting goaltender for the Buffalo Sabres. Enroth was playing too well, so they got rid of him for Anders Lindback. If that's not tanking, I don't know what is. February 15, 2015, Cody Franson and Santorelli are traded to Nashville for Olli Jokinen, Brendan Lepsick, and a first going to Toronto. Don't remember Jokinen in Toronto. February 26, 2015, part of a most really bizarre deal in my opinion, because Yager goes to Florida for a second and a conditional third going to New Jersey. I don't really know what either team has to gain. I guess Florida's closer to the playoffs. They'd end up being 5 points out, so I guess that's what they were going for, but I don't know. It's interesting that Dale Talon kept bringing in these older guys. He loved to bring in his own guys. He brought in Madden, Kopetsky, Versteeg, Bolin, how many of his other guys to Florida, Brian Campbell, and he also brought in these really storied veterans like Yager that would do that stuff. February 26, 2015, we have a trade that involved no players playing any games, but it's important to mention because Nathan Horton goes to Toronto for David Clarkson going to Columbus. The trading of contracts, that sort of thing, begins here. February 27th, 2015, Kimmo Timonen goes to Chicago for a second and a conditional fourth. This is 40-year-old Kimmo Timonen coming off blood clots and he gave up a second, really. We won the Stanley Cup, so it's fine. February 28th, 2015, Thomas Fleischmann goes to Anaheim for Danny Heatley and a third to Florida. Heatley never plays a game in Florida, and oh, how the mighty have fallen, is the phrase I like to use there. February 28th, 2015, Vermette goes to Chicago, and I was a huge Antoine Vermette fan, so I was really excited with this trade for Klaus Delbeck and a first going to Arizona. That first hurts more than Klaus Delbeck. That's all the trades I could write on the board, so I got the rest right on my phone. March 1st, 2015, Curtis Glencross goes to Washington for a second and a third going to Calgary. Glenn Cross does not work out in Washington at all. Miserable deal for Washington. Big trade on March 1st. Keith Yandel, Chris Summers, and a fourth go to the Rangers for John Moore, Anthony Duclair, a conditional first, and a second going to the Arizona Coyotes. Winnipeg gets Lee Stepniak. The Rangers get Carl Klingberg, so Stepniak gets to Winnipeg. I remember him there. Detroit gets Eric Cole, a conditional third, for Matthias Janmark, Matthias Backman, and a second going to Dallas. So remember Janmark with Dallas, that's how he got there. I don't remember if Janmark ever played a game with Detroit. I don't think he did. Boston gets Brent Connolly from the Tampa Bay Lightning for 2 seconds. So Tampa, all the way up there, trades off an asset for 2 seconds. Boston doesn't even make the playoffs. I mean, they're tied for that last playoff spot, but it's unfortunate for them, I guess. Tampa gets Braden Coburn on March 2nd, 2015 for Radko Gudas, a conditional first, and a third going to Philadelphia. I honestly hardly remember Gudas playing in Philadelphia. Montreal gets Jeff Petrie on March 2nd, 2015 for a second, a conditional fifth for Edmonton. Anything else? Chicago gets Andrew Desjardins for Ben Smith and a conditional seventh going to San Jose. Tyler Kennedy goes to the Islanders for a conditional seventh or a third to San Jose. Jeez, I've got a spasm there. Pittsburgh gets Ian Cole on March 2nd, 2015 for Robert Bortuzzo and a seventh going to St. Louis. The Islanders get Michael Neuvirth so Neuvirth's playing well in Buffalo. So what do? They trade him for Chad Johnson, a conditional third. So your tandem in Buffalo is Chad Johnson and Anders Lindbeck. You can't tell me with a straight face that this isn't blatant just tanking. Jordan Leopold to Minnesota for Justin Falk, not that Justin Falk, and a fifth going to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Olli Jokinen goes to St. Louis, in which I have no recollection of either, for Joakim Lindstrom and a conditional sixth. Chris Stewart goes to Minnesota for a second-round pick going to Buffalo. That's Buffalo just getting really good value. Simon Despres, I honestly never knew how to pronounce his name, for Ben Lovejoy going to Pittsburgh. Despres goes to Anaheim. And then Vancouver makes a big mistake because on Sven Bartchi, I don't remember how to pronounce his name, he goes to Vancouver for a second going to Calgary. A lot of hype for this guy, never panned out really in the NHL. Anaheim gets James Wisniewski back along with a third for Rene Bourque, William Karlsson, and a second-round pick going to Columbus. Montreal gets Torrey Mitchell for Jack Nevins and a seventh. Toronto gets Eric Brewer and a fifth for Corbien Holzer. And that's really about it. There's nothing else here. So, yeah, a lot of bigger trades this season, comparatively speaking. Not a lot of big free agency signings, though. In retrospect of this year, we saw the great tank. The great chase for McDavid. The Hawks, of course, finish with the winning Stanley Cup when the year McDavid is drafted. Goes to show. But they get Bedard in the end, so it's okay. Buffalo blatantly tanks. They don't get the first overall pick. Edmonton does. In my mind, though, the Coyotes, who had the second worst record, were the ones that deserved it out of everyone. Imagine McDavid in a Coyotes uniform. That's a sight. In terms of anything else I have to say on this year, not much. Although the next off season, we would be hearing some announcements about expansion. Not in the 2015, but the 2016 off season. So we're almost there. We're almost to the point where at 31 teams, we got 2 more years before at 30 teams before we start moving up again. And yeah, that's going to be all I have for you guys in this one. I want to thank you all so much for watching this video, and I shall see you all in the next one. Have a good one.